Thank you, Evan, for a very kind introduction. And hello, everybody. Greetings from Tokyo, Japan. 45 years ago, as a student in college, I watched a film by Stanley Kubrick called 2001: A Space Odyssey. In it, I was surprised to find that there was hardly any trace of green or nature per se. And it so happened that Arthur Clarke, who wrote the science fiction, came to our university and gave a lecture. And after the lecture, there was a Q&A session wherein I asked him, Mr. Clarke, do you think that man would be able to live in a perfectly artificial environment? To which he replied, possible, but highly improbable. Man is a very adaptable creature, and he probably could live in a totally artificial environment, but he would probably opt to not to. So it's really a matter of options. That was his answer. Perhaps inspired by 2001: Space Odyssey, I went on to tackle my college thesis. What I proposed was a flying house. Why a flying house? There are actually three reasons. One, I wanted to propose a new paradigm of architecture from compression-based materials to tensile-based materials and structures. Ever since the time of the ancient Egyptians with their pyramids, the Greek Parthenon, Roman Colosseum, or the Great Wall in China, all these great architecture have been built with hard materials such as stone, concrete, bricks, steel, and the like, which were thought to be heavy, solid, hard, and therefore strong and durable. But the Maginot Line, as you might remember, which was said to be the greatest fortress in human history, was overrun by the Nazis overnight. Now, instead, take a look at a spider web. It's almost invisible. You can hardly feel its existence, but spider webs can withstand hurricanes, earthquakes, and the like. So what makes a structure strong and durable is not really what it's made of, but really how it's made. Very much like the Japanese martial arts of karate, aikido, and judo, which uses the opponent's force, strength to overcome. So I wanted to propose a very lightweight, efficient, but very strong architecture based on tensile strength. Reason number two was I wanted to liberate man from the shackles of private land ownership, figuratively as well as literally. Because of scarcity of land, we have waged wars, and we still do. So if I were to able to come up with a flying house and liberate man from the shackles of private land ownership, I thought I might be able to lessen the problems of aggressions and wars. My third reasoning was if we were able to live in a flying house, how fun it must be. And from 45 years ago, the advent of IT was predictable, and should such a world come into existence, we could travel the world around and work and live as we pleased, footloose and fancy-free. So without further ado, let me introduce my flying house. This is it, still grounded. And here is its section. It's basically a pneumatic geodesic system based on Buckminster Fuller's Fuller Dome, but air inflated. Each module is a triangular cushion that's fastened together, jointed by fasteners, zippers. And so the interior of the house need not be pressurized. So we could have open doors, windows to allow cross ventilation. But instead of air, if I should inflate it with helium and added some more balloons on top, I was able to create buoyancy and start to let the house fly. Now, at the end of my presentation, 45 years ago, I presented this animation to the tune of the Beatles' Obladi Oblada, where the heroes Desmond and Molly get married and go off on a honeymoon. Just married. And they travel the world over to the Swiss Alps, Mediterranean. And 45 years ago, my flying house silently disappeared into the sunset. Now, a vice president of a major housing manufacturer in Japan called Daiwa House loved my flying house and said, let's try to develop a house like the flying house, but grounded. And we thought of a free dome. Free dome, again, is made of triangular cushions. And with this simple module, we are able to create almost any kind of design, shapes, forms. And here's a life-size model of this typical module, triangular cushion, inflated with air. The white material on the edges are not zippers or fasteners at this time, but Velcro. The white This white sheet here is a special, very thin insulation developed by one of the major membrane and tent manufacturing companies in Japan called Taiyo Kogyo. And these are some of the Velcro fasteners that we used or tried to use for this system. Now, our free dome is ordered through the internet, and a couple can build a house in a day or two. Again, the system, The system uses, here. Again, it's a double membraned cushion that's fastened together. And so the interior is not pressurized, and we can have cross ventilation. Now, if we should inflate the cushions with hot air or cold air, the entire house becomes one huge radiator. So it's not only a mechanical, not only a structural system, but a mechanical one as well. However, we realized that it was still too early for a free dome or a flying house. And the president of Daiwa House Company said, let's develop something that's sellable. And we came up with what we called Eddie's House, a prefabricated housing system that used primarily existent parts of what Daiwa House had already had. Now, of course, Eddie is my nickname, but it also stands for Edward Daiwa Design Innovation. And the theme of this house was go in to go out. Why? Because in the center of this house was this very small patio onto which all rooms looked out to, allowing natural sunlight and air to penetrate. Here's the living room, and the dining room, and looking the other way, a multi-purpose room, a master bedroom on the ground floor, and by night it was like so. And here's a small version. At present, we have 6 plans, or 6 types, with 54 different plans. And here's the interior of that smaller version. Now, this Eddie's house was designed with the theme of interface. Now, interface is an intermediate space between the inside and the outside proper. And it basically acts as a buffer zone, a filter, a cushion to alleviate the unfavorable factors outside. And for perhaps 20 or 25 years, I've been using this theme interface to produce not only this Eddie's house, but my other architecture. But one day I came to realize that what I had thought was original and unique to my design was not. It had been in existence for hundreds of years, if not thousands, in traditional Japanese homes. And interface in such an example was what we call engawa, or peripheral corridor, running around the entire house. Now, this peripheral corridor, during the winter, with the storm shutters closed and shoji screens or paper screens shut, would act as an insulation zone. In the summer, we would take away all these partitions and storm windows, and the house becomes one with nature, where you have cross ventilation. So here is that example of a traditional engawa, or peripheral corridor, acting as the interface. Now, I also realize that if engawa, or this peripheral corridor, existed as one know-how of Japanese traditional living, then there must be a wealth of other design vocabularies from which we could borrow and apply. Not copy, but apply the concepts, principles, using new materials, new technologies, and design. And from here on, let me introduce you some other examples of such design vocabularies. This is the engawa, traditional old example, translated into a new one. This is a house that we built maybe 7-8 years ago in Kyoto, the old capital of Japan. Shake is borrowed scenery, an interface between households. Old example. Tsukimidai is a moon-gazing terrace which acts as an interface between heaven and earth, a shake on a grand scale, you might say. And here is the new example in the Kyoto new house. Rooftop terrace, moon-gazing terrace. Tsuboniwa is a pocket garden which acts as an interface between inside and outside, as well as between inside and inside. Some of these small patios, especially in Kyoto traditional homes, can be 1 square meter, but it does wonders, miracles, to allow natural sunlight and breeze to penetrate the house. Old example and a new one. Nijiriguchi is a very narrow entry into a tea room. It's an interface between ordinary and special. It also accentuates this processional entry, whereby once inside, everyone becomes equal. And I used this idea for the entrance to this Kyoto house. Tokonoma is a stage in a tea room, which acts as an interface between host and guest, as well as between inside and outside. Very often, seasonal artwork is displayed at this tokonoma. And the host and the guest sort of communicate through this tokonoma, communicating about the artwork. And so this tokonoma acts as a lubricant between these two parties. Old example. And my new tokonoma. Irori is a hearth which warms not only things and bodies, but also the heart as interface between individuals. This hearth in the Kyoto house sits right in the center of the house, separating the living from the dining. Eaves to allow winter sun and prevent summer sun and rain out. Old example, translated into a new one here. Using aluminum louvers, aluminum louvers with transparent glass. Shoji screens and louvers. Shoji is the traditional Japanese paper screens to soften harsh light. Wooden louvers, reeds, and here's an example of such in the new house. Or translucent glass, or smoked bamboo louvers. Shoji screens with bamboo louvers. And of course, for mechanical purposes, natural cross ventilation, or nature, was our main mechanical system. In this house, we had two types of doors, one solid and one for the summer to allow cross ventilation to occur. This is the Japanese room in the basement, looking out to the patio on the ground, the subterranean level. Rotenburo is a traditional Japanese open-air bath, which acts as an interface between natural and man-made, outside and inside. And this Rotenburo in the basement of this Kyoto house was actually interiorized but openable. Akari, andon, chochin are candlelight, floor stands, and lanterns, respectively, to suit the eye level of life on tatami mats. This is two fans made of Japanese paper that was used as lighting brackets, and the same fans used as pendants for over the dining table. And in the moon-gazing terrace, actually real candles, as well as electric lights. And at night, the whole house sort of glows in the neighborhood. And this is the section of this house in Kyoto. As you can see, it's very, very eco-friendly, sustainable, with patios on the rooftop to increase thermal insulation, eaves of aluminum louvers, glass, and underground patios to allow sunlight and breeze to penetrate even the underground zones. And as such, we were able to win the very prestigious Chicago Athenaeum Green Good Design Award on top of many other numerous eco-design awards. Now, what I have shown you so far are examples of more or less industrialized high tech, coupled with traditional design vocabulary whose ideas, principles, concepts could be used and applied into modern ones. And I'm sure this is not only a special case to Japan, but applicable to all cultures and traditions world over. Now, in contradistinction to my relatively high-tech flying house, for my thesis in college 40 years ago, for my thesis in grad school at Harvard, I opted to do a self-help housing and city urban planning design for the poor homeless in Bombay, India. Being an urban design project, I approached the problem at various scales, starting from this urban context. And this is the basic city structure. Now, for transportation vehicular road networks, T-junctions or Y-junctions as compared to X's have a lot less collision points. And so we opted to use these T or Y junctions to eliminate electric traffic lamps. And as such, the road vehicular network was a hexagonal grid. Now, this is showing a sector of that urban fabric where train stations are elevated to allow vehicular traffic to go underneath to pass through. And at minor train stations, the opposite would occur. Now, there would be bazaars that would start from the train stations leading out towards the housing regions. And this is a typical bazaar street leading from the station. And then let me show you an example of a community area where pedestrians are the priority. And so we had these bumps where buses and cars would have to slow down. And we also planted these bus stops, street corner shops, and vendors as urban design vocabulary. This is the neighborhood. The building materials were basically sun-dried mud bricks with bamboo that's readily available in India. Now, I forgot to mention why I opted to do this self-help housing in Bombay. 45 years ago, and I'm sure it's still true today, whenever earthquakes, floods, disasters would occur worldwide, the developed nations would send in very beautiful, well-designed prefab housing systems. But they were never used. They became garbage, unfortunately. The only solution that really worked was sites and services with self-help housing. Now, these poor people would be provided sites and infrastructural services such as sewers, water, utility lines, and so forth. And they would receive a coach, a trainer, who would direct these amateur builders to build. And what happens in such a community is that fringe economies develop. For those that were building buildings for their own, other people would come to help to provide beverages, foods, perhaps laundry services, clinical services, even massage. And the whole community, not only those builders, but the whole community would thrive. And that's how this Sites and Services program was the only program that really meant a lot to these people. And they took pride in building their own, and they really enjoyed making their own homes. Now, a typical house would start with the bare minimum. Yes. At the beginning would be just one room with a small farm. And then in time, another room would be added. And then over time, perhaps a staircase would be added to allow second floor to be developed. And in time, the owner of the house would have his own palace. Now, this past summer, I helped design a beach house in the outskirts of Tokyo. One thing I was taught at school was to never, never, never build on sand. But this beach house was just for a 2-month period. And so it was doable. We won't build on sand for a year or longer projects, but for a two-month project, why not? The only materials used were 2x4s, wood 2x4s, and these plywood boards, and Japanese reed partitions to cover the entire structure. And here it is when completed. And it survived a number of typhoons, and after 2 months, it was dismantled to be recycled next year. Let me touch very briefly on the subject of transportation in Japan. As you might know, we have a very good system of railroads. The bullet trains in Japan run every 10-15 minutes, and they're punctual to the second. You won't believe it, really. One thing we regret having done away with are these urban trams and trolleys. And we are making some efforts to sort of revive the system back into the city. Also, another problem we have is we don't have roads for bicycles. I'm showing you a police box in Japan, which is one urban design amenity that secures safety in the neighborhood. And there's one in every locality. And policemen ride around in these bicycles. And up until recently, bicycles were allowed to be driven only on pedestrian walkways. But being dangerous for the pedestrians, they were recently transposed to vehicular traffic roads. But there, bicycles are in danger. And so we very, very soon need to develop a system of bicycle roads in Japan. But just to go on a little detour, let me show you one example of a police box that we designed a number of years ago. In summary, for a self-driven city, what I believe is required is a wealth of options, as Arthur Clarke remarked, from industrialized high-tech to self-help low-tech by TPO, time, place, opportunity. I think what we need to do is to provide as many options to choose from and to choose wisely from there on. Now, this symposium is about a self-driven city. In consideration of such, what else could be more self-driven than the universe that we inhabit and the life that we live? We never asked the universe to be created. We never asked to be born, but here we are. And what is the force, the power that self-drives our universe and our life? I'm an architect, and of course, as much as I'm in love with my profession, I love very much science. Why? Because science is the pursuit of the workings of nature. And recently, I have come to call nature or universe God design, and I consider God design as God's most ambitious and greatest work of architecture. In the science community today, there is a rush or a search for the holy grail of science, which basically is the unification of the four forces of nature, namely gravity, electromagnetism, and the weak force and the strong force in the atom. And scientists around the world are working day and night to try to unify these four forces of nature. Why? Because if anyone should succeed, it's an automatic Nobel Prize winner. Now, I'm going to surprise you by telling you that I believe I have found the answer. But unfortunately, I wouldn't be winning the Nobel Prize simply because my answer is love. Now, I don't want to sound sleazy or without being anthropomorphic, romantic, or sentimental. I'm convinced that love is not only a biological necessity, nor just a spiritual necessity, but a physical one that created this universe. As such, our God design is nothing but an evolution of love evolution. And this past April Fool's Day, I created a prank, a serious prank, discovering this belief, or showing this belief, this discovery. But then again, who am I to say this and for you to believe? But what if some great scientist, say Einstein, said the same thing? Well, I have a surprise for you today. In one of his letters to his daughter, he said exact same things as I mentioned to you today. He said that love is the universal force uniting and binding everything in this universe. Love is God, and God is love. Oops. And for any one of you who would like to read this letter, please search the web for Einstein's letter to his daughter on the universal force of love. Now, if you won't believe me, I'm sure you can believe Einstein. And that being said, that if we can embrace love and design with love, in love, for love, I believe we're on the right track, and all should be well. Thank you.